Hi, this is Frank Newbecker. Welcome everybody to the Zoom call. I'll be turning over hosting to Ryan once he joins.
Hi, this is Brooke Raker. I am president of the Crime Prevention Board and a Crystal resident, and I'll just be listening in.
Awesome. We are recording this meeting also so that Ryan can post it publicly after this so that people that can't attend can see what's going on. So.
Sounds good.
Hey, Ryan, I've just made you co-host, so you should have controls over things, but I'll also work on doing any moderation needed during the meeting.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank.
Yep.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hi, Ryan. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Getting my video situated too.
Yeah. I was having a little bit, because of course it's me, so I'm having technical issues, but I should be good now.
Hey, Brian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am well. So we'll give folks a few minutes here to get situated and logged in, and then we'll get started.
I'm going to pause the meeting and recording until we get started. Just remind me, Ryan, to click the button. Also.
So I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. We have a variety of community members, and then there's also been a vast interest from city council and state legislatures to at least review the audio from our conversation today. So with the legislation session just starting and busy time of year, folks were not necessarily able to make it, but they have expressed strong interest by email. So I'm excited to share our conversation back to them after. So while you may not see them here presently, just be sure that be aware that there's some really good interest in our conversation, especially as we kind of dive deeper on specific topics. So before we get started, since there are some new faces in our Zoom here, just want to introduce a few core folks, and then those that are community members, if you want to, I'll call on your name as I see it in the screen. You just want to pop on and say your name, whatever you're comfortable with sharing, such as, whether you're a resident, you're just a concerned Minnesotan, or if you live, work, play in the community, stuff like that. So feel free to share what your interest is. And then if you have any ideas at this time, we'll have a couple other segments here where we kind of pause and have you ask questions. But if there's anything that you're here to learn or to know, or a concern you have, that's a good opportunity to share it too. So we'll kind of start with how I see the screen on my end, which is Chief Revering in the top left. If you want to start with introducing yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Ryan. Stephanie Revering, been a city employee for this year will be my 24th year, 23rd year as a police officer. I started as a non-sworn CSO, and then the last 8 and so much years as the police chief. Married with 2 adult stepkids. That is me.
Awesome. Well, my name is Ryan Adams. I'm a member of Crystal Residents for Change and a moderator for the group. I have had the privilege to have almost 6 or 7 conversations with Chief Revering and Deputy Chief Hubbard and City Manager Norris, along with other council members. I'm passionate about policing and law enforcement in our community, as well as human rights. And so those are a couple of topics that I got involved with after the murder of George Floyd. I've been a resident for over a year now in Crystal. It's been a great experience getting to know my neighbors, as well as city elected officials and others. I'm here because I'm looking to progress this conversation further and bring others with vested interest in the community along for the journey too. How about you, Chief Hubbard?
Hi, everybody. Brian Hubbard, Deputy Police Chief. I have been with the City of Crystal for about 2.5 years, in law enforcement for about 15. And prior to that, spent a 17-year career in the nonprofit world as a youth worker and a nonprofit administrator. Grew up in Crystal and currently live 3 blocks out of Crystal over in what I like to call West Crystal, otherwise referred to as New Hope.
Thank you. How about City Manager Norris?
Thanks, Ryan. Well, I came to Crystal in 1991 as our first community development director, and I thought I'd stay a year. So here I am entering my 30th year with the city. I've been city manager for 20 of those years, and I think Crystal is a great city. I love the community and I love the staff we have. We have great staff, and I'm looking forward to the next conversation we're having tonight. Thanks.
Down to the second row, I see Councilmember Kaiser.
Hey, everybody. I'm Therese Kaiser. Thanks, Ryan, for all the work you're doing on this issue. I am on Crystal City Council. I was elected in 2018, so I'm starting my 3rd year as a council member. I am a 27-year resident of Crystal. I live here with my husband, Randy. Our children are now grown and don't live in Crystal anymore, but they both grew up here. I am so excited about what's going on and so sad about the state of our community, maybe in light of what happened last week, which I think is also truly race related, but that is my opinion. But I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. So thanks, Ryan, for setting this up and all the work you do.
Thanks. Now we'll probably speed up some of these introductions. Now we have more community members. How about Frank?
Hi, Frank Newbecker. I've lived in Crystal for over 10 years now. I'm actively involved in the local political scene. I'm currently the chair of Senate District 45 DFL, and I'm just interested in making Crystal a better place, keeping it a great place. I enjoy living here, and super glad that we're having these type of conversations.
Awesome, welcome. Hey, Eric.
Yeah, hi. I can pretty much say ditto to everything Frank said. I've been in Crystal since 2017, I think. We moved from an exotic land to the east called Robbinsdale, and have enjoyed our time here, but there's a lot of very good conversations going on. Thank you, Ryan, for keeping the Facebook page going. And yeah, I want to be a little more of an active observer, or maybe a participant. We'll just have to see. But I appreciate you providing the opportunity, because things change when people show up. So hi, everybody.
Thank you. Hi, Deb.
Unmuting. I'm Deb. I've been in Crystal for 3 years, and I have 3 kids and my husband. And I'm interested in the conversation as a concerned citizen and someone who cares very deeply about issues of race equality and those sorts of things, but also because I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so I've been very interested in some of what I'm hearing about trying to more effectively deal with mental health issues that sometimes fall in the lap of the police and can go, it can be difficult when police are not as trained as mental health professionals. So I'm kind of interested in that angle of the conversation and what I've been reading on the page about that part. So that's why I'm joining.
Awesome, welcome, thank you. Hi, Tiffany. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Tiffany. I was not here for the beginning, so I'm not really sure what everybody said, but I see my neighbor Eric there. Hi, Eric. I've lived in Crystal for 12 years. And I just joined because it said a conversation with Crystal PD, and I was like, hey, I like to talk. So yeah.
Awesome, well, you are very welcome. For those that weren't here when I started, not a problem. It is a drop in, drop out kind of evening. What we're doing is just going around and introducing ourselves and any vested interest we have in the conversation, and how long you've been a resident or in the district. So Aisha, I see you're next.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Aisha Mustafa. I work in the Robbinsdale Area School District. I've been a resident for about 12 years or so. Some of you probably recognize me. I heard about the conversation with the police, and I wanted to be a part of that. I am also the chair for ACER, which is the African Career Education Resource Inc. In Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center. I see you guys nodding your heads, so some of you recognize that as well. I'm very much interested in the conversation and would like to see, what we can do, what needs to be done, and how we can get it done.
Thanks for joining. I see Senator Rest. You want to introduce yourself? You're welcome
to. Good evening. I think I can do better than any of the rest of you. I moved to Crystal 50 years ago, 50 years ago. Lived there for 2 years, and then, as someone else said, moved a little bit west to New Hope, and have been a homeowner in New Hope ever since. However, just recently reestablished more family connections with Crystal. My 2 twin nephews just bought a home in Crystal and moved in the 1st of November. So not only family there, but new constituents. But so I've seen Crystal grow in very many ways. We lived just south of Target for those first 2 years that we were in Crystal, in a lovely little neighborhood. So thank you, Ryan, for including legislators tonight. And I did just run in from the Capitol. I've been there all day, and I'm going to stop my video for just a little while so that I can eat my dinner without grossing anybody out. Okay, so thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Appreciate
Thanks for joining us yet again.
You bet.
And I think I saw Rep. Freiberg as well. He's probably driving home from a long day at the Capitol. Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm parked at the moment, actually. So I was at the Capitol for a few hours, but we were able to do the sessions remotely also. So I was home for part of it. But I'm also trying to deal with driving kids around and checking in on my parents who just moved back into their house after a fire last February. And so I keep moving closer and closer to Crystal, but I'm not quite there yet. I am, in fact, next door to Crystal. I'm literally the last house in Golden Valley, and my next door neighbor lives in Crystal. So I'm feel very close. Like I can in fact see Crystal from my backyard. So it's a great city. I do represent the southern half of Crystal in the legislature. So I'll probably, I'm in my parents' driveway right now, but I'll probably turn the video off here, but I have the audio running through my car also, so I will be listening in.
Thank you. Appreciate you being able to attend. And
yeah, glad to be
personally, I also appreciate that when George Floyd was first murdered and when he was murdered, and I had first reaction of who to contact. I contacted your office, and you responded the next day in great detail with things that you've pushed in the past as far as change, and that you're so well attuned to what some of the things that we'll be talking about tonight. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see who's next on this list. I think Amanda, I see you there now.
Hi, good evening. I want to go ahead and say that it has been a very long day for a lot of these people. I saw them at 7:30 this morning before they ran off for our Legislative Action Coalition meeting. So hi again. You can really tell what people's interests are and how much of an impact on their community, they want to make, because you see the same several people over and over again. That being said, I grew up in this area. My family had a house in New Hope. Me and my mom lived in Crystal. I graduated from Armstrong, moved away. I actually did, and then came back. So I have been here for most of my life, I would say probably 30 years. So somewhere between Crystal, New Hope, or Plymouth. But I have 4 kids within the Robbinsdale Area School District, and we currently live in Crystal, but can see Robbinsdale right across the street from us. So pretty close with that. I think obviously the impact of this year has made me obviously more interested in knowing what we can do to work together. I tried with many other community members I know that are involved to make relations with our schools and make relations with our police department. I love, donate or coffee with a cop activities, and your community service officers have been really great. And I appreciate the personal response from you regarding my daughter in her incident this summer at the skate park. So I really appreciate that. Ultimately, I think everybody wants the same things. Like, we all want to be heard. We all want to be treated, like humans. And I hope that we can have conversations to move forward on how these goals are put together forward for everyone. So thanks for showing up every day.
Thanks, Amanda. We've got 3 more here. Brooke, want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hello, I'm Brooke, and I am the Crime Prevention Board President for Crystal, and I'm also a Crystal resident since, I guess it's been about 4 years now, last month. Also just generally a follower on the page and interested. So I will also have my video off, as we'll be eating shortly, but I'll be listening in.
Awesome. And Brooke, if we don't get to it today, I would love to connect with you regarding a crime prevention idea that I did submit to the police department, but it's an idea from Golden Valley that their prevention board funds. So it's hopefully we get to it today, though, so you can participate in that.
Okay.
All right, Mel, if you want to introduce yourself, you're welcome to.
Hi, I am Melissa. We have 2 Melissas at work, so that's why I'm Mel here. I am a resident myself here for 18 years, but my dad has lived here in Crystal for 30 years. And so I lived between both houses. So I've been partially a resident for 30 years. And we have 3 children between kindergarten age and a senior. And I'm here for many of the reasons everybody else is, but also just to kind of see where this conversation is going and give input, should I have any.
Yes, please do not hold back. This is a good opportunity to have direct access to the chiefs and city manager. And the space is your space. Last one here is Joyce. Thanks for being
Yeah,
patient.
hi. I'm glad I kind of made it. I actually have another Zoom meeting. Also started at 6. I just had to log out and read it, to be here because this is very important to me. I'm Joyce Cooper, and I'm a loving, concerned resident of Crystal. I've been here about 4 years now. I live here with my boys, and I also own an operator sewing business. I'm actually a commissioner on Ward 4 with the Park and Recreation. And amid all has been happening in our communities and cities, the issue of police, relationship with residents, it's very important to me. So I'm here to see, how, we can all work together and, make our communities a better and safer place, for all of us. And I just want to say I will have to, log out, to go into the other meeting and still come back. Hopefully, I can be able to, get more, information on what is going on. If not, I hope, Brian, you'll be able to maybe furnish me, with, other things that we discussed in case I miss whatever, okay?
Yep, so
but I'm
I'll
very
be sending.
excited to be here. Yeah, it's very important. That's why I made sure to log in, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for dual tasking and joining us. And
Yeah.
I'll be sure to send a video out after this, as well as with some timestamps as to discussion points, so that folks that are interested in certain topics can fast forward to that point. So we are 20 minutes in, and I'd love to get started on some of our questions and topics. And in full disclosure, I did send this list out to all the participants likely on this call. So people have had a chance to digest some of this and or hopefully had time. And then we welcome conversation, and we'll pause and feel free to use the chat to raise your hand, and then I can call on you and go from there. Right off the top is you have to forgive me, Chief Revering, if I'm just forgetting the exact details, but just want to confirm that current policy prohibits all maneuvers that restrict the flow of blood and oxygen to the brain, including neck holds, choke holds, and similar excessive force.
Yes, yep, we have a policy on that, but I want to make sure that everyone understands. With that said, if we are in a deadly force situation, then it's possible that something may be used with regards to that. Now, again, it is in policy that we restrict neck holds, choke holds, but if it's a deadly force situation, then that could change.
And is that inclusive of head strikes with hard objects?
Yes.
And then is there anything that prohibits use of force against persons in handcuffs?
That's something, Ryan, that I didn't get a chance to take a look at. So let me take a look at that, and then I will get back to you. Brian may be able to answer that, and I hate to put him on the spot, but that's something that I did not look at.
Okay.
I would say that the best way to describe it, in my opinion, would be any use of force the officer has to be able to articulate what precipitated the use of force. And I think, as we've said before, we actually are just completing, I'm hoping this week, we will put it out, kind of a whole rewrite of our use of force policy. But in the old policy and in the current policy, what we've tried to clarify in the new policy, it was there, but I don't think it spelled it out as well, is that you have to be able to articulate why you're using force. And so does the policy specifically say that if someone is handcuffed that there would not be a use of force against them? No, it does not say that, because it's possible that that person is still, the officer is still able to articulate why force should be used. However, the policy, the old policy and the new policy do state, which I think is maybe more to the point, that no force can be used against someone as a punitive measure. And so if the person is not representing any kind of a danger to self or others, handcuffed or not, there should be no use of force. So I guess that's how I would answer honestly how the policy reads. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I appreciate the expounding on that. I think it is an area of concern in law enforcement nationally. So that's why the topic comes up. And I think that as a community, we want to ensure that our policies reflect protecting persons that are detained and that are not a harm to the officer or public. And I think that there's always been examples of instances where officers have taken, whether that was punitive or other methods of harming those that are already detained. So we want that to be in policy so that if there is an officer that's conducting that kind of behavior, that they can be held accountable. Because if it's not in the policy, we can't ensure accountability on that. So.
Yeah, and I do think, one of the things in this policy rewrite, I don't know that I would say it's really extensive, but certainly we have really gone through and fine-tooth comb, and we've tried to clean up some redundancies and really, make sure the verbiage is clear. And certainly one of the things that I think was in the intent of the current policy, but is written into the new policy, is that anytime there's a use of force, the officer has to articulate what was the legal justification. And by that, I mean statute pretty clearly says when peace officers in the state can use force. And so we're saying that the officers will have to be able to articulate after the fact, what was that legal threshold that you used to determine that force was necessary? And again, so I think it's always been the intent of the policy, but it's very clearly spelled out in the rewrite of the policy.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone in the community have follow-up questions on this topic? So relative.
Kind of related, but not directly. I know, unfortunately, Minnesota does not legally prevent police officers from having sex with people in custody. Do we have any direct policy for Crystal stopping that practice from ever happening?
I believe we do, but I couldn't quote the specifics of the policy. I would have to dig through where it doesn't. My eyes have been the last month pretty laser focused on our use of force policies. I do know that it says something about it, but I'm gonna have to dig to find that for you, and I'll try and do that while we're talking.
Yeah, I believe, Brian, I think it's under our 2.1 expectations, I believe.
Well, let us know. We can come back to that and greatly appreciate it. Relative to the policy, I'll be curious if this is in the rewrite, as we've discussed it on a few occasions, and we just there's been some other revelations in change in the area, and so for example, the city of Minneapolis has instituted a new policy that prevents officers from accessing and reviewing footage prior to writing their report when it comes to firing or discharging their weapon. So I think that's an area that we would still love to have align with citizens, so that officers don't have a different advantage in their report that a citizen would, because they don't get to review the footage if they're suspected of a crime, which if an officer fires their weapon and injures or kills someone, it could be suspected of a crime. So I think that's an avenue that not all instances, but in particular, just when the use of the gun.
So Ryan, just so I'm clear, so you're asking about our body camera policy and whether or not we allow officers to view body camera footage?
No, our past conversations have revealed that your current policy does permit them.
Correct.
So this is us asking to change that policy to align with the access that a citizen would have if they were suspected of a crime. So City of Minneapolis, changed their police policy on this front, and I support it, others support it, and we find it to be a positive change in policy. Should you guys be able to consider it, given our interest?
Yep, and I haven't read Minneapolis' new policy, so I'll have to do that. That's something that we certainly will review. And then if I could I just want to reference something in the chat that Representative Freeberg said about the reform bill and the ban and the chokehold. We're well aware of that, and we've had that in our policy even prior to the legislature actually passing that. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that we do have that in our policy.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. Do you, we'll come back in our future conversation after you've had time to review the Minneapolis policy and assess how that might affect your department. But glad we can at least air the idea and concern, as we will throughout the night, many of these ideas.
Ryan?
Yeah.
To the previous question from Frank, it's in our policy of professional conduct. There are actually a number of pieces in there. I won't read through them all, but looking at it, it looks like we have, I believe, 4 specific policies or sections of this policy that have to do with sexual favors, sexual harassment, unwelcome sexual advance, etc. And for anybody's reference, if you're not aware, all of our policies are online on the website. And so again, for anybody who would want to reference it, it's policy 2.2, which is professional conduct of peace officers. And that's section 4 there.
All right, thanks for the specifics on that. It's greatly appreciated. The next big topic is one that we continuously have. And I think that there's been an interesting finding from a large police force out on the East Coast in Newark. In 2020, New York police, Newark, did not fire a single shot. They had their station, attempted to be overrun by rioters. They live in a highly populated, in a high officer staff area. So for them to not have fired a single shot from any on-duty officer, I think is huge. So some questions that came in on this front, kind of start high level, which is in 2020 and in 2019, how many officers from Crystal PD fired or discharged their weapon on duty? If you could answer that first.
Sure. So before I answer this, I just want to make sure that that everyone hears this, that it's very rare for officers to fire their weapon, very rare in the entire country, nationwide, certainly here in Crystal. With that said, unfortunately, in 2020, we had a rather busy year when it came to certain crimes and calls for service that we responded to. In July of 2020, one of our officers was run over by a felony suspect. And I have to be very cautious with what I talk about here, because both of these particular instances are under investigation and currently at the county attorney's office under review. And so I just have to be very cognizant of that. So I apologize that I can't give more detail, but I will tell you that we in 2020 fired our weapon 2 different officers 2 different times in different situations, so twice. In 2019, 0 times.
Awesome, thanks for sharing. So I should have prefaced that how Newark and departments try to prevent use of their guns is through de-escalation. So my hope is, even though we've touched on this a number of times, is for you to share a little bit more about your current de-escalation resources. Oh, sorry about that. Your resources currently, your current budget, if you have any that you know off the top of your hand, as well as how your upcoming 2021, 2022, how you're focusing on implementing more de-escalation training and resources, knowing hopefully that it is effective in the community.
Yep, absolutely. So, and Brian, please chime in at any time, but I will start off by saying this, is that in every use of force situation, and this is in our policy currently, and Brian rewrote the policy as he's been talking about the use of force policy so that it's even more explicit in there. But in every use of force situation, we are always attempting de-escalation. We do that on every single call for service, on any traffic contact. That is something that we focus on. And that was even prior to the legislature. You may know, all of you on the call may know that recently the legislature passed that of the CEUs, which is the credits through the Minnesota Post Board that police officers have to have. 16 of our 48 CEUs have to be within a certain 4 criteria, and one of those criteria is de-escalation. Prior to that being passed in the legislature, our department, as many others in the state, had de-escalation training, and we will continue to do that. It is important. Our officers recognize the importance of de-escalation. As all of you know, I don't have to repeat myself, but as all of you know, we do not want to fire our weapons. This is not something that we get into this business for. We truly don't want to do that. And so the de-escalation training that our officers receive, that's where they get the skill set to be able to do their jobs effectively. And that's something that's very important to both Brian and I, to the entire department, to our city manager and Norris and our council. Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not specifically. I would echo the chief has laid a pretty clear foundation, which I think I've said for a number of our times together, that is clearly her expectation, and I believe that of our city leadership, of how policing happens here. And so there's lots of different benchmarks for it. I mean, de-escalation is a concept. It's not a program. And I say that to say, the reality is, even though there's long ways to go, as we've talked about as a profession, de-escalating has been happening in law enforcement since the start of law enforcement. If I go and 2 neighbors are all amped up at each other, part of what I'm trying to do is to de-escalate them and calm them down. The problem is that as society's become a whole number of other things, that what we are trying to address as it relates to de-escalation is making sure that for us, so we're not talking about everybody else, but for us, we make sure that we are, I would argue, combining de-escalation with bias training, and making sure that we understand that we are de-escalating, we are effectively de-escalating in all situations, regardless of whatever bias that we might have. I do believe that the two of those two things go together in how we're going to interact. And so that's the focus on what we're trying to help officers understand. There are lots of different trainings, some of them good, and frankly, some of them not good. And I think, as I've shared before, as the gatekeeper for training around here, just because the training says de-escalation, it's not necessarily a training we're going to send you to, because that's not what they do. To be really honest, when the legislature moved forward and the post board moved forward with this de-escalation stuff, there have been all kinds of flashes in the pan. Probably twice a month, I will get a random flyer from somebody who saw an opportunity here that there's dollars from the state coming to do this training, and we're going to label it de-escalation, and it's not good training. And so I want us to make sure that what we're doing is good training. And part of that is in-house as well, that we do a number of in-service trainings in-house, and that we focus on de-escalation even in-house. The pinnacle training that you will hear officers talk about in de-escalation and crisis intervention and mental health work is called crisis intervention training, CIT. It's a 40-hour, very intense training, paid actors to come, as opposed to just a bunch of cops trying to act like they think a situation would be. I was just doing stock, and I believe we're currently at 21 of our 32 officers who have been through that. And now those trainings were put on hold. Now they're ramping back up again. So my hope would be that now many of our newer officers, we can get them through that. So I think we continue to be on a good trajectory as this being important, and that we again, that the training is focused on being good training.
Yeah, thank you. We do have 2 follow-ups that have come in on this. One, just talk about training and credit hours. Obviously, quality over quantity. As you know, I look at other cities websites and their data on their police and such. And for example, Golden Valley, they report that, well, first I want to clarify that it's 48 CEUs every 3 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So they say that their officers typically reach about 200 in that 3-year period. So I'm just curious, do you have any details as to what a Crystal officer typically reaches?
Yeah, I actually think 200 is low. I mean, I would think on average, yes, probably each officer is around 200 hours. We send our folks to training a lot, and that's a good thing. We spend a lot of money on training, and that's a good thing. We're thankful that our council allows us to have a rather healthy training budget, because just because you have the 48 credits in the 3-year time doesn't necessarily mean that's appropriate too, right? Like, this is why it's always good. I always say that, and I'm sure all of you do in your lives too, you shouldn't stay stagnant. You should always be learning in your profession, and that's something that we take pride in. So I would have to say that's a pretty good number, is that 200 hours per officer.
Awesome. And then again, kind of a community talking point for you guys is talking about, hey, here's what the state says. Post says 48. Here's where we are. I think knowing that gives us some confidence in education being tackled. And but again, we don't want it to be a number to which is being attained because it's just quantity. Like Brian said, quality is definitely the better measurement in that front. The next one is, I think Eric might be. Oh, go ahead.
One other thought, I'm sorry, that just came to mind before we move off that topic. In this, and the chief gave me credit, I shouldn't take credit. We've got a team of folks that have been working on this rewrite, but the way our body cam policy has been written is that supervisors can review body cam footage, should review body cam footage of the officers that they're responsible for with some regularity, and that happens for all kinds of reasons. The way we have rewritten and are moving forward with some of our tracking stuff is that basically what we would consider every documented use of force case, we will now require a supervisor to review that body cam footage and sign off that they've reviewed it. Again, not because we think we have a rampant issue. I don't believe that we do, but it's just one more step that we can say we've got another set of eyes of someone not there that's taken a look to see, did we handle this the way we should have? And that means many things. Did we de-escalate properly, or did we move into force too quickly? If we used force, did we use it the correct way, and did we get out of it when the threat was no longer there? And so I would just point that out, that in this new policy, that will be an addition that we haven't had in the past, that requirement that every one of them be reviewed.
Yeah, thank you. Eric, do you want to ask your question there?
It was less of a question, just more of an observation, I think. I'm personally encouraged to hear that not only is there this focus on education and training, but there's also attention paid to the quality of that education. That makes me feel a lot better. Just by way of background, speaking of continuing education credits, I practice medicine at St. Louis Park. I'm a family practice PA with Park Nicollet. And so the idea of, we just started, there's a fellowship program and the fellows are coming through our clinic, and education is a continuous process, and it is really important. And it's about preparing people for the eventualities more so than teaching them a recipe, right? So that resonates, and that sounds good. And I'm very glad to hear what I'm hearing about how that's done. Just my comment I'd made in the chat was that thinking about what Ryan describes about Newark, I'm curious about, how many shots were fired or how many weapons were discharged 5 years prior or 10 years prior, and what kind of changes Newark needed to make and how they made those come about. Because I think it's interesting to think about a situation where not only are officers properly prepared and educated and trained, but they also feel incentivized to de-escalate and to find the non-lethal or less lethal kind of modality. And I think it's a culture thing as much as anything. Back in the day when I was at Hennepin County Medical Center as an ER tech, as part of my training and preparation for eventually going back to grad school, Minneapolis police officers were sometimes in the ER, escorting patients who are also under custody and stuff like that. And that's a whole other conversation, but it goes to culture. And I know that I'm really happy to hear that 21 out of 32 Crystal officers have had the crisis training and the specialized thing, because in Minneapolis at that time in the early 2000s, the badge would have this little, Greek letter, this little psi for psychology for the ones who had been through that training. And over time, I learned how to identify that. And I always felt more at ease around those officers who I knew had a little bit of education and perspective, maybe about what was going on with this person medically or psychologically. So yeah, sorry, that's lengthy, but basically this so far, I like what I'm hearing is what I'm saying.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And
yeah,
on the Newark front, I'll be sure to send you, it's a Department of Justice findings from 2014 that led to the changes in Newark. So their findings are similar to findings that occurred in Ferguson. So the Department of Justice actually does a great job at assessing and then giving recommendation, and then departments.
Well, it's too bad that was necessary, but okay, yeah. Because the question is, how do you make all these changes and move things in a positive direction without first having to have a Newark or a Ferguson situation? I think that's kind of under it all. Thank you.
Exactly. And I'm going to introduce Aisha, but one thing I want to say before, it's remiss not to mention, but while Newark has had these improvements, two things occurred. On January 1, 2020, their officer just killed a guy. So it's an open investigation, but the first day of 2021, they fired their weapon. And secondly, Newark Police Department has still been found to have bias in their force, how they treat the Black community. They are more likely to stop a African-American 2.7 more times, and they're more likely to use excessive force on an African-American 1.5 times. So they still have some racial issues as a department to solve. So I'd be remiss not to mention, I'm not praising Newark in total, because there's way more work to do. On that front, Aisha does have an interesting fact to share if she wants to unmute and ask and make a statement about that.
Hi. So I'm originally from Newark, New Jersey. For those of you who don't know, I'm from the East Coast, and Newark, New Jersey is where I grew up. Like Ryan said, there are a lot of those issues. The racial bias continues. But one of the policies that they do have in Newark is that you have to be a resident of Newark in order to be a police officer in Newark. So you can't police the area and not live somewhere within. And being that the way that Newark is divided up, even though it is predominantly Black, Latino, Newark has wards and sections, which culturally, they're cultural shifts. The downtown Newark area is the central area, and then you have north, south, east, west. And each ward has its own culture as well, like you said, Eric. So a lot of what goes on in Newark with the police officers depends on that. But the question I wanted to ask is that CIT is a training that is done throughout the country. It's not working, not for everyone anyway. My question is, when it comes to those domestic situations where we are going into homes where people are calling because they're having mental health crises and they're calling for police assistance, is there an effort to train officers with CPI training, which is crisis prevention intervention, and is used in mental health institutions as well as schools? So my question is that something that you would look into or are looking into, or for Crystal?
Yeah, Aisha, thanks for the question. It's definitely something that we'll look into. I will tell you that we're excited that we are partnering with Hennepin County and the cities of New Hope and Robbinsdale and embedding a mental health social worker in our police departments. So this is something that we've been researching for quite a number of years here in Crystal, and we finally, it came to fruition here as of January 1st of this year. So that's something that we're proud of. I'll also talk a little bit about our embedded domestic assault advocate that we have in Crystal through Cornerstone. And I will tell you that, you know, we need to do a better job at having the conversation with her on making sure that we're understanding the mental health issues when we go to domestic assault calls. So it is something that we definitely are aware of. It's not something that we ignore. I'm very passionate about the fact that we have so many domestic assault calls just here in Crystal alone. And it's not a good thing. And it's something that we have never ignored here. And we certainly want to make sure that we stay present and make sure that we help the victims of domestic assault. So I will certainly look up, Brian and I will have a conversation on CIP, and I certainly can get back to this group on that the next time we speak.
Thank you.
CPI.
And,
CPI, I'm sorry, Aisha, thank you.
and Aisha had a second question regarding residency requirements, and Rep. Freiberg has raised his hand to provide a state legislative response on that.
Sure. I'm not driving now, just so you know. I'm parked in front of Sandberg waiting for my daughter to come out of her swimming. So I'm kind of been multitasking this evening. But yeah, it's a great question, Aisha, about residency requirements. Unfortunately, about 20, I'm not sure exactly when this occurred. It was before I was in the legislature, maybe 20 years ago. The legislature passed a law that actually prohibited cities from requiring police officers to live in their community. And I know that I've heard this about like the Minneapolis Police Department, for example. I think I heard something like 8% of them actually live in the community. But unfortunately, cities are not able to adopt that, even if they want to. I mean, it's never been a question of like requiring it at the state level. It's just allowing cities to pass that requirement if they decide that that's what they want to do. Unfortunately, the legislature does have the ability to take the authority away from cities in those sorts of areas. As part of the police package that passed, there were discussions about allowing cities to do this again. That was not something that the majority party in the state Senate was willing to agree to. However, we were able to pass as part of the police package, something allowing cities to offer incentives for police officers to live in their communities. So whether it's a monetary incentive or some sort of benefit if they live in the community. So it's a step in the right direction, but as of currently under state law, if the city of Crystal wanted to pass a requirement that police officers live in the city of Crystal, they could not do so.
I would also point out that when we did have the mandate to live in your city, there were a lot of scofflaws. There would be 20 police officers who would identify their residence as a single apartment when they really didn't live there. And that just seemed to be mocking the desire of communities to provide recognition and neighborliness of the police officers in those communities. And so that mandate didn't really lead to the kind of association between police officers and their neighborhoods. And that I think that led to that law to start with, so that at least police officers weren't having to pretend that they lived someplace that they didn't. So appreciate being able to clarify that.
Ryan, do you mind if I respond, or?
Yeah, if you don't mind, and then I'll have Eric has a point, and then Aisha as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. I just, I have to comment because I'm very passionate about this subject. I think Ryan may have heard this from me before. And so for others who haven't, I just have to say this. As someone who is not a resident of Crystal, however, I am a resident of Brooklyn Park, which is right next door. I have spent almost 24 years working for this community. And I will tell you, I have spent more time and hours here in this police department for these residents more than I've spent with my own family. So that should tell you the passion that I have, and I'm not the only one, but this entire department has regarding our residents of Crystal. And I wholeheartedly want to tell you that I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I don't want anybody on the call to think that just because the police chief or officers do not live in this community, that they do not have a passion for who they serve, because they certainly do, at least here in our department. So I just want to make sure you hear that. I know when people hear that, you know, legally, the legislature can't do anything about that, but residents really think it's impactful that officers do live in the community they serve. I don't disagree with that. However, what I'm trying to tell you and share with you is that for me and from the majority of my, in fact, I would say all of the officers that work for us, they feel just as passionate as I do about who they serve.
Thanks, Chief. Eric, did you have a point?
Good. Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that's a great point, Chief, and I appreciate the work and the dedication and the passion, and that's fantastic. I wonder if, you know, and respectfully, Senator, the fact that the law wasn't very well followed or very well enforced last time around, it's not a very compelling argument this time. You know, I feel like.
No, I would agree. I was just
Yeah.
trying to explain.
Understood.
It wasn't being followed, that's all.
Yeah, and that context
Not a
is very.
justification for changing
sure.
it. It just
Thank
was not being followed.
Yeah, and that's important context. I think that if we think about this issue, we should definitely consider all of that. We're not an isolated little small town in the middle of no place. We're not a small town, you know, that's its own thing right next to a big town. So it's not a Ferguson / St. Louis style situation, but I do think that it's still compelling to people. So I wonder if, number one, maybe a better version of that state law would be that X% of the staff and sworn officers in a department should, you know, reside within N miles of the city borders. And I'd be curious to know what percentage of the 32 officers we have are commuting, you know, less than 15 miles, 25 miles, whatever. I think what makes people nervous is when you live in South Minneapolis and the people who patrol your neighborhood come from Ramsey, you know, there's a disconnect there. There's a cultural problem there. When you live in, you know, Burnsville and your officers are coming from Lakeville, it may not bother you as much. But when you live in Crystal and everybody's coming from New Hope and Plymouth and Robbinsdale and Minneapolis and a few from farther out, I think that's an easier situation for people to deal with. The important thing is, you know, where people live and where they spend their non-working hours is an important part of how they view the community they're in. And one of the things I know about police culture is that, you know, people go into it all idealistic and all wanting to make change and make the world better. And then they come up against crisis situations and people in extreme situations and high emotions and difficult situations, and it wears them down over time. This is a stereotype, but it's also kind of sort of borne out. I've done some ride-alongs. I was a criminal justice major 25 years ago. So I think why it's important to people in the community is that we like this sense that people know what's going on and they view it not just from the seat of their squad car. You know, they view it as a community member. So I don't think it's appropriate to ask 100% of a department to come from 1 or 2 area codes or zip codes within the city limits, especially in a suburb like we have. But, you know, it would help us to know how many people are coming from not that far away. You know, how many people patrolling Crystal have never been in and don't go to Crystal except for work? I think that's kind of the gist or the crux of the issue, right? So I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Before we jump to Aisha, yeah, Deputy Chief Hubbard, if you want to answer it, it is something we've discussed before, but I think this group would love to hear kind of where our officers are coming from.
I don't know the number for sure. If I were to make a guess, if the question is who lives 15 minutes or so from here, I would say I'm going to go a third plus of our staff are probably in that mix. And I guess my response, I agree with the chief. I spent my first 12 years in law enforcement in Edina. I've never lived in Edina. I've always lived in New Hope. And I think I went to work every single day and Edina got every part of what I had to give plus some. I understand the sentiment of folks. I will tell you that the flip side to that, my concern in that when you talk about a large city, you talk about a Minneapolis, a Chicago, a Newark, I understand that sentiment because you've got a lot of options. If you take a city like Crystal that's got 22,000 residents and not a lot of space, my concern in that is that as the person who is charged with whittling down and recommending to the chief who we might hire, I'm afraid that we lose really the pool of good candidates who say, I mean, for me, for instance, in this role, I'm well established. I have 3 teenagers, and for us to uproot and go somewhere else, I simply can't do that in that life. And so it worries, the worry for me is that we lose really good candidates who say, yeah, I can't move there. One argument would be, well, good. If you're not willing to invest at that level, then we don't want you. For me, the push to hear the sentiment is trying to wrap our hands around what is it about the idealism of that we need to make sure that we are instilling in our staff. That, for instance, I would argue, interacting with residents every day, I would argue that most of our officers here know more about what's going on in this community, good and bad, than lots of the residents. But there's an idealism there that's not at all lost on us. And I'd like to encapsulate that and say, those are the kind of officers who are espousing to that value that this community has, regardless of where they're coming from to get here. Now, I don't know how we do that effectively, but boy, to say you got knowing how hard it is to really get to the cream of the crop of all of the candidates that we see every time. I want as wide of a swath as we can to get the best people. I don't want to narrow that because someone says, yeah, I'm 38 years old and have an established family here, and I've got my parents that I'm caring for that are down the road, and I can't do that right now. I want you as a candidate still. You're who I want, and how do we do that? So sorry, that's a long-winded answer to, I think there's something to the idealism of it, and it maybe residency might be an option, or maybe there's something else we wrap our hand around of how do we make sure that our staff is espousing to that.
Oh, those are great points. Aisha, thanks for being patient.
Thank you. So I can speak to that one, Mr. Hubbard. In New York, a long time ago, when I wanted to be a police officer, I almost joined the NYPD. The NYPD offered an incentive where, as a new recruit, when you got into the NYPD, their incentive was to have an apartment in a building right off of Wall Street. It's called Battery Park. I'm sure many of you have heard of that area. What I think, or why I think this would be a great incentive and it would work towards the idealism that you're speaking of, is the home ownership aspect and piece. Crystal is a very small community. A lot of people are older, they're not making very much money. And if the city, or let's say the cities between Crystal, New Hope, all work together on the part of, especially when it comes to doing the land, when they're contracting and the contractors come in and they purchase the land and they say, they already automatically say, this is what I want to put on that land. Those are opportunities for the city, and if possible, the police department, to come together and work for those opportunities or incentives that also come through HUD to specialize some areas of those homes, houses that are for sale in the areas or whatever, so that there's more incentive for them to buy property and live in a neighborhood. That creates that, I don't want to say utopia, but it creates that neighborhood, that neighborliness that we're looking for, that is a part of what's missing when it comes to having them policing these areas. When I grew up in Newark, I had police officers that were around all the time, but it got to a point that I actually knew them by name, first name basis. They would see me walking somewhere and they'd be like, don't you live on 16th Street? What are you doing over here on 19th Avenue? Or what happened? See me upset. What happened? Why are you walking like that? That's the neighborliness that we miss. And the bias doesn't help, but it allows for them, when they're living in the neighborhoods, to look at people of color as, that's my neighbor and their kid, they live down the street. They get to know people a little better, not by force. I apologize. Miriam's trying to get my attention here. But I'm saying that just to say that I think that if the cities and the police departments worked a little better together closely, there might be something that you guys could come up with where it would make both the neighborhoods not only safer, but it would also close that gap that we're having the issue with. This is just my thoughts. And I'm gonna be quiet now.
Thank you, Aisha, for your perspective and your thoughts. They are certainly valued, and hopefully it's a conversation we can kind of continue to evolve and brainstorm on. Because certainly there's a major theme here that we're all looking at, which is further investment by officers in our community in ways that we can do that, especially if it's bringing in female officers or officers of underrepresented races onto our force. There could be incentive options there as well. So we are at 7:05. We have about 25 minutes left. We have a lot of other topics kind of on the radar here. If there's no other questions on talking about this, we can start on another conversation here. So up next, I have probably a more brief conversation point, which is updating the process for filing police complaints. Currently, you can file a complaint in a number of different ways, but most of them, as far as online, result in pulling up a PDF and printing it or scanning it and sending it. I know that Deputy Chief Hubbard, you've said why that is in the past, but with looking at how other cities do this in Minnesota as well as around the country, most of them seem to have a less cumbersome process of being able to fill out a form online and just click submit using all the legal and other type of required information that you need. So the suggestion here is to create a leaner process for filing a complaint that doesn't require a PDF, so that enables the ability to submit something online, because anytime we have barriers such as these ones, I feel like they're preventing people from potentially providing compliments as well as complaints in a more simple manner. So here's a suggestion.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you. So just so everyone knows on the call, we receive compliments and complaints on a regular basis via email. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that they that anyone in the city or outside of the city, if they come in contact with our police officers and have an issue, they can email at any time, any supervisor, just to make that clear. With regards to the actual formal complaint form that Ryan is talking about, I had to go online today because I wanted to see exactly, making sure I didn't speak out of turn. You are correct, Ryan, that you can, I believe you can actually fill it out, but you would have to print it out to sign your name and then email it directly to me, right? So that is something that I certainly can talk with Mike Peterson, our communications guy, who is in charge of our website. I can talk to our IT guy as well to see if there's a way to actually physically fill it out, as you're saying, without having to, right, print, save it, print it, and then send it to me. So I'll look into that. I'm sure there's someone definitely smarter than I am to figure those things out. So I will definitely look into that.
Awesome. Thanks for accepting the criticism and critique and looking further into it, as it could be a positive.
I do think it's important to know, I think that's a pretty easy deal because I know that the city has some other online forms. I will say, because I think it's important to note, as you know, to your point, taking a form and completing a form, however we do it, is either cumbersome or annoying to some people. And the complaints that we take come in all forms. And so we get emails, we get phone calls, and every one of them we deal with. So whether something that doesn't come in as a formal complaint, if the chief or I got an email today that met that threshold, I don't necessarily need you to complete that form. We still are going to react to that. So the form is a formality, and I think it would seem like that's probably a pretty easy lift for us to do it so that we can do it online. But I just want everybody to know we don't need you to jump any hoops. We need to know what the concern is so that we can address it, however it gets to us.
Yeah, thanks for that. One of the things I learned, throughout talking to you guys, especially in the first two meetings when this conversation came up, is your openness and your willingness to meet in person with somebody that has concern, whether obviously if they're under 18, the parent, but if they're over 18, with that individual. You said you were willing to sit down, look at, say body cam footage or something like that, if someone wanted to see it in person and discuss with you. So to me, that was an instant trust and instant positive in working with you both. And I don't know if you want to say anything in that front, having some community members that have not heard that from you before, because at the time we were just doing in-person meetings, but I just thought it was such a positive thing that you guys shared that it'd be great to share here.
Yeah, Ryan, the one thing that I can't stress enough to those that are here and that I say to every community member is the fact that Brian and I couldn't be more, we want to make sure that our residents know that we work for them, right? And the biggest thing is to make sure they understand that if they need to watch body camera footage from an incident they were involved in, we encourage them to come in and do that. If they have a concern that happened on a traffic contact, we want to know about that. If they have a compliment to share about one of our officers, we want to know about that. We, meaning me in particular, and Brian, cannot do our jobs effectively for all of you unless we know. Right? I always tell our residents when they're complaining about their next door neighbor with loud music, I ask, the very first question I ask is, have you called 911? And when they say no, my response is, well, how are we to know? Right? And so in order for us to be able to do our job, yes, we definitely want people to call us and to email us and to stop in and see us. I would love to show all of you my messy office. So it's important to Brian and I have, and my boss Ann knows this very much, is that my philosophy has always been to make sure that the residents in Crystal know that we treat everyone with compassion, integrity, and with professionalism. And if we don't, then I need to hear about that. Brian needs to hear about that.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I'm just looking at comments here. I think you said, is it on Adobe? Are you referencing the form to fill out? If so, yes, it is in a PDF format available on the website, which is what I'm hoping that they can create a different form. Obviously, the PDF works for mail and email and in-person drop-off, but a simpler online form would be beneficial. Another question that is shorter again is, is there currently a policy that requires an officer who fires their weapon or is in a vehicle accident with a police car or is suspected of use of excessive force to submit to a drug and alcohol test within an hour of the incident?
Yeah, I don't think our policy says within a certain period of time. Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but we certainly do have a policy that says that it is I believe the word is voluntary. I could be wrong in that, but I think it does say voluntary blood draw. With that said, I will tell you this, since I've been chief, we've had well, I want to say 3, possibly 4 officer involved shootings, and every single officer submitted to a blood draw. And I'm going to say that the reason for that is because the majority of officers they want to make sure that they know what we're doing, that they're doing the right thing, right? So I mean, now, with that said, obviously, if there's a suspect of alcohol or drugs, that is something that that we're going to hopefully know prior to anything like that happening, right? And obviously, that's going to be a suspicious thing, in my opinion, if they decide not to submit to a blood draw. I think there's been questions on whether or not, and Brian can maybe speak to this a little bit more deeper than I can, but I have talked to many chiefs who have the same, very similar policy that we do about it being voluntary, and them saying the same thing I am, that every officer that they know has submitted to a blood draw. I question whether or not we legally can actually force people, right? And it's the same thing with COVID and the vaccine. And, the question came up, am I going to force our officers to get the vaccine? Well, personally, I'm not sure I can legally do that and force someone to take something, into their body without, so I guess it's the same thing here, right? Can I legally do that without having some type of threshold that says that I can't? For example, if we had an officer who we suspected was doing drugs or alcohol, obviously that would be dealt with in a different way. So yes, we have a policy. No, I don't believe there's a timeline other than it is in my experience. It is taken within a few hours, the blood, but it is voluntary.
I appreciate you clarifying that. Oh, up to you, Chief.
I was just going to say, I believe, and don't quote me on this because I'd have to do some digging, but I do believe that this topic's been litigated a little bit, and that that we can request that as the employer, we can request that an officer submit to a blood draw. We cannot force the blood draw without a warrant, not unlike any other citizen. So if you're involved in a traffic crash, we suspect alcohol, and we decide that we want to draw blood, we ask you if you'll submit to the blood. If you don't, then we get a warrant, and some cities will then force that. We don't. But yeah, so I believe it's been litigated some that we can't require it. Now, what do you do in terms of if you require it and they say no, do you fire them, all that? I'm not sure that the litigation has gotten to that point, but it's broader than just, boy, we'd love for you to submit to this. There's certainly more legal that's beyond anything that we would want as it relates to that topic.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I think we would love to further understand, what your current policy is on this, because, a forklift driver making $11 an hour, if they hit a doctor or if they hit a colleague and not even necessarily injure them, they're going for a drug and alcohol screening. So I think it's only to instill community trust as well as accountability, that if an officer is to use any of those three things, that they go through a similar process that a minimum wage worker would go through for a similar incident. So again, aligning police accountability with citizen accountability is kind of just part of our conversation here.
Yeah, and again, just to clarify, I think that in the idea of being aligned, certainly, that forklift driver is not going to be held down and a needle shoved in their arm. The ramifications are employment ramifications, which then we get into the union issues that we've discussed, et cetera. And so I'm simply saying I believe that issue of union litigation is, I don't know where that is in the case law. Certainly we can look into it some more. I do believe, and I have to dig, but I do believe that the policy only speaks to chemical testing as it relates to discharge of the firearm. I don't believe that it specifically says that as it relates to motor vehicle accident. I believe that it says that we would treat that as a crime, which if we believe there was suspected impairment, we would do that. But I think those are the two notations in policy where it talks about complying with the alcohol test or drug test.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And yeah, of course, there's certain exceptions that apply to a citizen would certainly apply, and look forward to furthering that conversation the next time. Frank noted in the chat that Minnesota has a very strong employee drug testing rights, and but he feels that would fall under the workplace accident clause. So just reading that out for those that didn't see it there. We do have about 12 minutes left, and most of our other conversation pieces here are very in the weeds and in depth, some passionate conversation. So what I want to do is just preface to others what conversations are to come next time, and then also touch on an element of community policing, and engage Brooke on this. So coming up in our next conversation with you guys, we would love to focus on, overall community policing strategies. I know in the past, Chief, you've alluded to your knowledge of broken window policing and at times your application of it. So I think we want to further dive into your vision of community policing, some of the other strategies your peers have used around the country, or citizens have shown as other ideas to influence how your leadership style may be or evolve to. That's on one front. And then, going further into that is focusing on, stop, search, and ticketing and arrest practices, and how we can focus those on enforcing issues that really impact public safety, not just because an officer has the legal means, that they're choosing their battles, to say in more layman's terms, because some of these lower offenses do disproportionately impact low income and minority community members. We just want to make sure that we're putting the resources and applying your officer's time and such in a way that will truly impact our community by pursuing the offenses that impact our public safety. We'll go further into that next time. Part of that too is talking about ending criminalization of poverty and mental illness and addiction, and how that impacts police reform. Obviously, policing's changed over the past 100 years, and in the past 50 in particularly. So kind of unpacking some of that history and how policing resources have gone up, but not necessarily resources for mental health and some of these other things that your officers aren't necessarily have full training on, or even they have some training, but that's not what their core function is. So just talking about how we can introduce some of those types of things into our community. That's a good conversation to bring in our city council into, as well as state legislative members. So it looks like Deb had, who's this? This one's a small topic here, and that's Frank's asking, what's the current mask policy for officers while on duty? You guys could expand on that.
Sorry, I was trying to find it in the chat. Did you say mask? Did you say current
mask?
Okay,
Yep.
got it. Sorry. So our officers have to have their masks on when and Brian's probably looking at me right now going, why can't you say this? So when dealing with the public, as long as it doesn't affect their ability to do their job, meaning like if it's a dangerous situation, the mask becomes like a choking hazard, then obviously that's going to be a problem. But primarily they're wearing their masks in the public setting. How did I do, Brian? Yeah.
I would agree. I mean, the only other piece to that, I think, obviously there's a safety piece, but for me, the safety piece with officers has to do more with communication.
Right.
If you are trying to communicate something and, talking about use of force issues, there can't be any question about what it is I'm asking you to do, because if it doesn't happen, that's going to move one way or the other. So for instance, if I'm on a felony traffic stop, I'm going to encourage my officers, take your mask off, because I want them to hear exactly what it is that you're asking them to do. So certainly there's the safety piece, and I think the communication piece, but in general, we're asking the officers to have their mask on when they are in public places. We ask them to do it inside the building as well when they are moving about. We have, just as a quick aside of that, we have moved through the first wave of vaccinations for first responders. Very optional, as the chief alluded to. I think we've probably seen about 1/3 of the staff that were interested in doing that. And so that's the update on that. And my arm hurt for 6 days after getting that shot, like nothing I've ever felt before.
And Ryan, I'm going to assume the next topic that you wanted to talk about when you brought up Brooke is the program that's in Golden Valley regarding the Fix-It ticket. And yep. So and shame on me and shame on us for not promoting this more, but we do have a program like that. It's called Lights On program. I'm proud to say that we were one of the first suburban cities to actually sign on to that program about 3 years ago, maybe even 4 now. The program, if you're not familiar with it, it's called Lights On program. It was actually started by a former Minneapolis City Council person. And now, of course, as I'm talking, his name is escaping me.
Don Samuels.
Thank you. Councilmember Don Samuels created the program, developed a partnership with Steve and Bobby's Auto World, along with now several other shops, because we commented that, not all of us have Steve and Auto Body World in our community. So we've been a part of this program for about a little over almost 4 years now.
Awesome. Yeah. Where is that information at?
That's a great question. When you said that, I'm like, clearly it's not on our website. So we will get that on our website. We've promoted it a couple different times via social media, but I don't think we have it on our city website.
So do officers have a brochure or a coupon or something that indicates?
Yep, they have a coupon. Yep, it's like a little coupon that they can give to the driver to, if they, were pulled over for a light that was out, headlight out or tail light out, the officer gives them this coupon and says, you can go here and get this fixed for free.
And are there any businesses in Crystal that are benefiting from this program?
That's a great question. I think that was one of the comments that we had made. I don't know if there are for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to be sure that there are businesses in Crystal so that our local businesses are benefiting from that kind of referral in that program. And then secondly, I'm curious, how is this program budgeted currently? Is it a county, city? Is it a department?
It's not city. It's through actually Lights On pays for.
Okay,
it.
so nonprofit. Okay.
Correct.
It's a grant program that has expanded over the years. And we'd have to check. It is their program. They're the ones who initiate the contact with the businesses. We can recommend businesses. So if we had a service center in the city that was interested, we can refer that to Lights On. But it's their program, it's their contract. And so we can't just go to Midas and say, hey, you should do this. It's their program. We are just the recipients of being able to do that. But it's grant funded, so it's no cost to the city. And basically, when we run out of coupons, we say, hey, we need more coupons. They print our patch on it and send us a new stack of them. It's a fantastic opportunity. And I forget the last number I heard, Chief, maybe a couple months ago. I think there are probably maybe 40 agencies around the metro or throughout the state, for that matter, that are currently participating in it. So it really has had a good reach.
Yeah, it's now statewide, which is good. It used to be just local, metros, suburban and city, St. Paul, Minneapolis, but now it's statewide.
And do you have any data that reflects how your officers are utilizing this, as well as are they writing tickets, or is this the first thing that they do, or what is your officers' deployment of this?
Great question. No, I do not have any data right now, but it's certainly something that we can look into.
It ebbs and flows. I will tell you that, that our officers, and this is not an excuse, it's just a statement of fact. Officers have so many things that they are juggling and remembering and resources and whatever that actually when we started talking, I made a note because probably 2-3 times a year I'm saying, hey, remember, you got this option. So it's just a reminder that it's out there as an option for them. We'd have to do some checking, but we don't, as a department, write tickets very often for equipment violations. That would be pretty rare, even if we're giving them a coupon or not. You have a loud muffler. Most of our officers are simply not interested in that. You're not getting a ticket for it, even though Lights Out, I don't believe, would address that. So.
Okay, and that's great to know. I think, we as a community want to be sure that's a primary tool that officers are using, just because, again, those tickets, can create a burden, time-wise as well as financially on people that prevent them from getting it fixed. And, it's anything that can add to the spiral to a low-income person or someone struggling already is something we want to avoid. And so we appreciate you looking into that and ensuring your officers are empowered to not draft those tickets, not put that burden on folks, but really incentivize them. And maybe even audit the effectiveness of this program. Is it truly, is it enough? Because if the businesses aren't nearby, or if it's not enough of a subsidy, then potentially using Brooke and our local folks to set up a fund that can truly impact that might be another great way. So we are at 7:30. So again, I want to appreciate everyone's time for participating in conversation. I hope you guys and everyone here has found it beneficial. We really had a larger turnout than typical. And again, there's Google Docs that have past Q&A between the chiefs and members of our group that everyone has access to, and I can share those out again. If you ever need anything from me, I'm an open book and open door, so feel free to email or Facebook message. And I know the chiefs are in the same boat. Maybe not Facebook, but definitely phone, email, etc.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Nice to meet those of you who I haven't met before. And as Ryan said, Brian and I truly are an open book. Please don't hesitate. It does not have to be a month from now when we're going to meet again. If you have a question or concern, please email or call me at any time.
All right, thanks everyone. Thanks Frank for your Zoom and recording this and making it possible.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.